Welcome to those of you that are joining us. We will be starting in just a minute while we let other participants join. If I could remind you all to please mute as you're entering the space to make sure we don't have background noise, that would be wonderful. Thank you. We'll start in just a minute.
রেকর্ড হয়েছে রে এটা তাহলে কি রেকর্ড হয়েছে মিউট করে থৈছে রেকর্ড হয়েছে স্টার্ট হবে রেকর্ড করলে না রেকর্ড করে পুরো এমবি হয়ে যাবে না হলো সামথিং না হলো এপিসোড রেডি হবে না এটা স্টপ করে দাও.
Hi, everyone. If I could please remind you to mute if you're not one of the speakers that's coming up, or if you're not speaking at the moment, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. So thanks, everyone. I think, are going to start in just a minute. We have about 40 participants on a call, and I think we were expecting a few more, so maybe we'll just give it a minute and then we'll kick off. Thank you so much for being here. Before we start, maybe I'll just remind you all that this event is being recorded and is also being live streamed on Facebook. So if you are having any sensitivities around your name or your camera, please make sure to rename yourselves and put your camera off. So as you can hear, we still have a few people coming. So we'll start in just a second here. Perfect. I think we can kick off. Very warmly welcome to today's event. My name is Anna Spona. I'm the project manager at the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, where I manage our work on civic freedoms and human rights defenders. We are one of the co-organizers of this event. We are today going to be discussing and participating in an event called New Social Contract, Indigenous Peoples Human Rights Defenders Speak of What It Means for Them and What They Need. And this event is co-organized by Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, Indigenous Peoples Human Rights Defenders Network Asia, delegation of the European Union to Thailand, and Frontline Defenders, as well as my organization as mentioned. Thank you so much for being here. And I would kindly just remind everyone to please mute if you're not speaking, and also to note that we are being live streamed on Facebook as well as recorded. So if you have any sensitivities, please do rename yourselves or put yourselves off camera. Thank you so much. So again, welcome. And today, what we would like to really underline is the situation that we're facing with the COVID-19 pandemic, which offers both opportunities and challenges. So since the beginning of the pandemic, there have been rising calls on governments and business to form what's called a new social contract. This new social contract is meant to ensure just and sustainable recovery that would tackle not just the immediate consequences of the pandemic, but also usher us into a new and better distribution of benefits from our economies and a more equitable society. And social movements and civil society have been calling since the beginning of the pandemic to shift towards greater respect for human rights, including Indigenous people's rights, long-term sustainability, increased social protections, bigger and better inclusion, and just transition into renewable energy. What this event is aiming to do is to deepen that conversation about the new social contract by exploring the visions that Indigenous leaders from across Asia have for it, by articulating what the call for this building back better must look like between governments, civil society, business, and global allies, and also to discuss co-responsibilities for creating enabling conditions towards that vision. Our core message today is that for the new social contract to not end in just rhetoric, responsibilities must be shared, and Indigenous peoples, human rights defenders in Asia must continue to play a meaningful role in articulating and demanding that their vision, needs, and enabling conditions are met and manifested. This event will unfortunately also highlight that we're very far from that optimistic vision, because rather than creating this enabling solution towards achieving inclusive and transformative change, what we're seeing is that the pandemic has been used so far as an instrument to create detrimental laws and solutions and increase attacks and murders and violence against Indigenous peoples' human rights defenders. As our speakers will show, we're observing the continuation of short-sighted environmental destruction, unsustainable business investments, the rolling back of social and environmental safeguards, and the alienation of the very people that have the ability to create territorial peace and environmental stability. And that's done in the name of conservation and in the name of solutions to economic recovery, and it's often accompanied by militarization. And our speakers today will further unpack these root causes of attacks on defenders and the barriers to self-determination. Unfortunately, the risks you will hear from our speakers are part of an ongoing pattern of attacks against people protecting rights and the environment. At the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, we have been recording attacks on defenders connected to private sector for the past 5 years and have so far recorded over 3,300 attacks. The reality is, of course, a lot higher, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. AIPP also recorded around 350 cases from 2020 up to June 2021 from 9 countries in Asia, and most of those cases are related to land and criminalization issues. In our research, agribusiness and mining are the sectors most related to attacks. Indigenous defenders face the highest levels of risk according to all of our data. I'll pause here just to say that we now have interpretation into Thai that you can select by clicking the button below, the globe button below. And this will also be announced in the chat. So just to resume what I was saying, agribusiness and mining, according to our data, are continually the sectors most related to attacks, and Indigenous defenders continually through the 5 years face the highest levels of risk. In 2020, we had found that at least 1/3 of all 604 attacks we have documented stem from lack of meaningful participation, access to information and consultation, and the failure to secure prior and informed consent of Indigenous communities. We have also found that risks have increased during COVID-19 pandemic as governments have been using the situation to further curtail civic freedoms, as we will hear from speakers. As we have all been saying collectively, and also as we will underline in this room today, is we do have an opportunity to rebuild society and economy in a way that recognizes the identity and abilities of Indigenous peoples and that ensures safe, full, effective, and meaningful participation of diverse groups, including Indigenous peoples, in devising solutions, and that prioritizes respect of all human rights. In my personal capacity, I would like to also add that given the scale of attacks and abuse that's connected to the private sector, it's also necessary to move beyond only voluntary measures for business conduct towards mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence. And at the Research Center, we would be happy to continue working with AIPP and everybody else in this room today to hold companies to account for these attacks. So before we transition to our distinguished panel, I just wanted to mention the main questions and topics that our speakers will discuss today. There are 4 of those. So the first one is the ways in which Indigenous peoples, human rights defenders, their communities and organizations are impacted disproportionately by COVID-19. And they will comment on how the government response in their countries was lacking and how the governments could have done better. Secondly, they will discuss how the global call for building back better manifests and how and what governments and other stakeholders must do to include Indigenous people's voices, needs, and concerns into this building back better. How obtaining their free, prior, and informed consent and including the collective and the individual rights of Indigenous peoples as recognized by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples must be included in this new social contract and in building back better. Thirdly, they will discuss the roles that Indigenous peoples play in the process of rethinking and building sustainable world post-COVID. And finally, they will discuss what support is needed from global allies in realizing their vision of the new social contract. Before we proceed, I just want to remind everyone again that this event is being recorded, that we are live streamed on Facebook, and that interpretation is available into Thai, which you can use by selecting the globe icon at the bottom of Zoom screen to access it. And just in terms of how we will proceed in this event, during the event, we will hear from each of our speakers about their defense of human rights and their vision, as well as have time to ask questions near the end of the session. You will have a chance to ask questions using your microphones towards the end of the session. But please feel free to also send questions via the Zoom chat throughout the webinar. And AIPP team will kindly be collating those, and I'll then pose as many as possible during the Q&A session. And with this, we can turn to our distinguished panel. So firstly, I would like to invite Ms. Francesca Gili, Cooperation Attaché from the EU delegation to Thailand, to say a few words.
Hello,
Francesca, over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me well? So good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. My name is Francesca. I'm the Cooperation Attaché at the EU delegation to Thailand. We cover not only Thailand and Malaysia, but some regional projects like this one with the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. So I'm very happy to be here today and to celebrate with you a few days ahead the International Day of the World's Indigenous People. So it will be on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken, on the 9th of August. Next Monday, on the 9th of August. And the theme this year is Leaving No One Behind, Indigenous People and the Call for a New Social Contract. So the topic of the webinar is comes from the from the theme of the International Day today, this year. So we are, as I was saying, as the European Union, we are very proud to support Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, AIPP, and the different partners in this regional project across Southeast Asia and South Asia. The aim of the project is to advance the rights of indigenous peoples and enhance the network of indigenous people, human rights defenders in Asia. Support for human rights, civil society organization and human rights defenders is a long-established priority of the EU's external human rights policy, and we are a major donor on this topic across the world. I would like to focus on three words or three topics, let's say. The first is people. The second is communities and resources. And the third is COVID-19, so which was mentioned already by Anna before. Regarding people, so indigenous people, human rights defenders, community leaders, and indigenous women play a crucial role, and they face challenges, threats, and violence in the context of land and natural resources and in the protection of the environment, biodiversity, and climate. The European Union was founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities, such as the indigenous people. And we are committed to promote the respect of human rights of all, everywhere in the world. We want to build capacities of people like you on the front line, defending the rights of individuals and communities who have no voice or no space or are in vulnerable situations. The second topic about communities and resources, so mainly natural resources. Indigenous people advocate for communities' rights, and this is a fundamental pillar in the protection of communities, but also in the safeguarding of the environment and natural resources for future generations. Communities have to have free, prior, and informed consent whenever they are consulted, and there must be consultation processes with local stakeholders. Anna was mentioning the importance of human rights in business and the private sector. So prior consent consultation must be ensured by state actors, but private sector representatives too have to take this into consideration. And as Anna was saying, now this is on a voluntary basis, and we hope that this will become more and more, let's say, a practice of the private sector. Because environmental issues are becoming more and more prominent, and human rights cases related to land rights, use of natural resources, climate change are every day more frequent. So we want to enhance strategic and evidence-based advocacy leading to improvement of human rights in Southeast Asia and South Asia and in Asia in general. We want to widen, together with you, we can do that, and we want to widen the democratic space, strengthen the rule of law, and promote and protect human rights and human rights defenders in Asia. We can only do so by supporting active citizens and communities like you, promoting knowledge and awareness of your rights and available opportunities. It's important as well to raise awareness on the human rights impact of climate change and environmental degradation. As third topic, so COVID-19 was mentioned already. It added several challenges to the already existing challenges faced by indigenous people, so discrimination, inequalities based on origin or identity. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, your work is even more crucial because the pandemic has greatly affected your communities and has meant lack of access to healthcare, basic social services. Lockdowns have limited freedom of movement, access to land and natural resources, and have contributed to food insecurity. I really hope that the situation will soon improve in Southeast Asia and South Asia and the whole of Asia in general, which is now suffering from a strong wave of the pandemic. And I hope the situation will improve for your communities, which are greatly affected from the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure all these issues resonate with you, along with many more aspects linked to participation in public life, access to education, access to information, access to justice, the possibility to use natural resources and safe drinking water. These are just a few of the topics you work with every day, but it's important to mention them once again. These principles, so human rights, access to justice, all these values are enshrined in normative, institutional, and policy frameworks that you need to know and you need to be familiar with and use. And if you are already familiar with them, you need to use as tools to advance your demands and requests. Some examples of these policy documents and international treaties are the International Labour Organization Convention 169 on Indigenous and Tribal Peoples, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Several Sustainable Development Goals are linked to your causes and your requests and your daily work. Then again, in the previous intervention, the importance of business and human rights. So it's important that you are aware of what is present in the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and possibly this will become more and more frequent and not just a voluntary work. And then I would like to mention the EU Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy for 2020-24, where you will find some of these principles and values that are mentioned above. These conventions and documents are your best allies and can support you in your daily work. We have several examples, like your project, of the support that the European Union is giving to indigenous people and these indigenous communities. I'm sure you are familiar with them, but if you would like to receive further information, to network with other communities in Asia or in other continents, we are happy to share with you other types of support that we are providing. I hope you will benefit from this webinar today, and I hope you will have a fruitful debate on this important topic of a new social contract from the lens of indigenous people. I would like to conclude by thanking you all for being here, and thanks to the organizers for setting up this program and for managing to involve all these people, and for reaching out through Facebook and other social media outlets. It's important that more people, I mean, the most people possible are aware of their rights and are aware of the opportunities that are out there. As EU, we will continue to pursue our work with different partners, international organizations, government, and most importantly, directed with indigenous people like you, to protect your fundamental rights and the fundamental rights of your communities. Again, I wish a fruitful rest of the day, and I hope you will celebrate the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples in the next coming days. Thanks again for asking us to participate. I leave the floor to Anna and the rest of the panel now.
Thanks so much, Francesca. Thanks for supporting this important work and also for reminding us all of the many avenues and opportunities that are out there. And thanks for EU's commitment to continuing to protect Indigenous people's fundamental rights. With that, we will now turn to hear from our 8 distinguished speakers, Indigenous leaders and supporting organizations from around Asia. Each speaker will have 7 minutes, and as mentioned, you will then have a chance to ask your questions. It's my honor now to introduce you to the first speaker, Mr. Kokon Sweeten Murmu, who is the Santal from Northwest Bangladesh. He's a human rights defender and project coordinator of Kapayang Foundation, a human rights organization of Indigenous peoples of Bangladesh. Kokon works to strengthen, lobby, and networks of Indigenous communities around the country through coordinating Indigenous peoples' human rights defenders network of Bangladesh. Kokon, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Anna. Greetings, Johar, to the organizers, moderators, and panelists, as well as viewers, in this eve of celebrating the International Day of World Indigenous Peoples. Before going to the specific questions of the panel, I would like to address the points that Indigenous peoples of Bangladesh are yet now officially recognized. They are termed as ethnic communities. So it's very sad for us that even in the eve of 20th events of UN Declaration of World Indigenous Peoples, we were still not officially recognized by the government. So I would like to go the first question that is related to the IPIJRD's challenge during the COVID-19 pandemic period. So Indigenous peoples of Bangladesh are already they have faces many problems due to the land grabbing, as well as many other challenges because of their poverty and locations they have located in the remote areas. So in this pandemic period, they have faces some challenges that's likely that loss of livelihoods and income, increase food security and starvation, because a lot of indigenous peoples have lost their jobs in the garment sector, who came from the remote in the cities, as well as many of the indigenous girls are working in the beauty parlor sector. So they have lost their jobs. And most of the indigenous peoples are dependent on hand to mouth. So they are the day labor of especially the northwest regions, and they have also lost their jobs. And that is how that they have lost their jobs. And people, indigenous peoples of Chittagong Hill Trucks, many of the places are very remote and in the hilly places. So the places called Ramu, as well as many of the places are facing food starvation due to the remoteness, and there is no channels and transportation channels to supply the food, and they could access the food. And debt and exacerbation is also reaching the highest level as they have lost their jobs. And the indigenous peoples are also facing the lack of access to the health services, because they have many problems because of the they are not very much fond of the local language, who are living in the remote areas, and the distance of the medical center as well as health center from the indigenous community areas is also the major problem. And also the health worker, they are most of them are from the mainstream communities, and they are not too much familiar with the indigenous peoples, and they are not oftenly they are not going to the indigenous peoples areas. And the human rights violations problem are also rising in this COVID-19 pandemic situation that is very offendable, and the intimidation and harassment to the indigenous people's human rights defenders is increased here. And one of the problems is that due to this pandemic situation, the court procedure, the legal procedure of Bangladesh are stopped. So if the intimidation and harassment as well as criminal as well as indigenous peoples are arrested in the Chittagong Hill trucks by law enforcing agencies termed as the criminal, and if the court process is stopped, so how they could bail them. So this is another major problem. And the land grabbing problem is surges in this pandemic situation. And one of the foremost example is that the land grabbing of Moro people in Chittagong Hill trucks. That is the global burning situations. You could understand the pre-prior informed consent is violated, as well as I mean the EPIC and other measures of indigenous peoples. And violence against indigenous women and girls are also raised here. So that's the challenges that indigenous peoples as well as the human rights defenders they have faces. So to mitigate the problems of COVID-19 pandemic, government have announced some stimulus packages, but not specific packages for indigenous peoples. And indigenous peoples find themselves disappeared in these stimulus packages. So it is better for the government to announce package specifically for indigenous peoples. That is the first lot of my questions. And secondly, I would like to address how we could build better after the post COVID-19 as well as in this situation. As you have know that almost 1/3 of the timeline had crossed by the Bangladesh as well as globally, that to reach the ambitious vision of 2030, but yet and Bangladesh have already published the SDG progress report of 2020, but there is no reflect of indigenous people's rights. There is not a specific segment for indigenous peoples that although the indigenous peoples are one of the major vulnerable group identified the SDG. So what should government can do for indigenous peoples as well as what we are demanding? We are demanding that government should recognize us as indigenous peoples as well as for our visibility, as well as allocate separate budget for indigenous peoples, and also reserve some quotas in the parliament to raise our voices, establish a separate land commission for indigenous peoples. And one of the major issues for indigenous peoples in the Chittagong Hill Truck is fully implement the Chittagong Hill Trucks Accord that was signed by 1997, Bangladesh government and the Peace Committee of Chittagong Hill Trucks on behalf of indigenous people, as well as ratify the ILO Convention 169 and also ratify the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because government have already pledges to the indigenous peoples in its 7 5-year plan as well as 8 5-year plan that they would ratify the UN Declaration as well as ILO Convention 169, but yet they have ratified that convention. And government should also
sorry to jump in, you have about 1 minute left. Thank you.
Okay, so they should implement the existing formalities, and they should the government department of Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, they should also mapping, they should conduct mapping and separate census to aggregate the data for indigenous peoples. And the CSOs, they should also alive and active in their positions. And thirdly, I would like to address the whole society approach of government, because the indigenous peoples have role that they could work towards the resilience of indigenous peoples, and they could cooperate with the government to increase their rights, and as well as they should cooperate the other wings of the citizen platforms. And lastly, I would like to address that the global allies, I mean the UN agencies as well as the diplomatic missions, they should more concerned about the indigenous peoples of Bangladesh. Already they are concerned because the UN missions as well as the EU delegations, they have concerned and they are helping the indigenous peoples. But one of the major problem I would like to address is that the missions as well as other development actors and donors are not directly funding and facilitate the indigenous peoples, because the donors as well as development actors, what they want is that the capacity, but indigenous peoples organizations and alliances don't have such kind of capacity to submit any kind of call. So they would more liberalize the policies for indigenous peoples to address. So that's from all about me, and I would like to thank my organization as well as the indigenous peoples of Bangladesh to giving me this global platform to represent the indigenous people rights of Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kokon. I realize that's a lot to cover, and apologies for being strict with time. Two things really stood out for me. The sentence that you said about indigenous peoples finding themselves disappearing in stimulus packages, and the importance of specific measures, and also of liberalizing funding policies for indigenous peoples. Just wanted to highlight those among many amazing ideas that you shared. We will now turn to Ms. Elina Joro. Elina is an indigenous woman human rights defender from Munda community, working for 2 decades on various issues affecting the rights of marginalized communities from local community to global. She is the founder of Adivasi Women's Network, chief functionary of Women and Gender Resource, founder and advisor of Interstate Adivasi Women's Network, core member of Jharkhand Janidikar Mahasabha, which is a coalition of more than 30 grassroots organizations working on various issues to save the democracy. Thank you so much, Elina, for being with us. You have 7 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anna. Johar, greetings to you all. Regarding impact of COVID and government response, I would like to share that due to sudden imposition of lockdown in March 2020, a large numbers of Adivasis, indigenous peoples, migrant workers were stranded in cities and other states. Most did not get wages for the lockdown period. In the absence of work and transport facilities, thousands traveled hundreds of kilometers back to their villages on foot or on cycles. Many lost their lives too in this process. The livelihoods of Adivasis were also directly affected. Farmers, their lives too in their process. The farmers couldn't sell their produces, minor forest produce couldn't be sold, and work stopped for daily wages earners. So Adivasis with already existing diseases, women, pregnant women particularly, children, elders, persons with disabilities were most affected during this pandemic. OPDs, that is outpatient departments, had stopped functioning in public and private health centers. Lack of access to public health services worsened in this period. Integrated child development services was non-functional. Many children were not immunized and didn't get basic health facilities during pandemic. The second wave in 2021 was disastrous. Many Adivasis died of COVID due to lack of medical services, oxygen, ventilators, etc. During COVID-19, all schools were closed down and online classes were going on. As most of the tribal communities are from rural areas, out of network areas, and with no facilities of mobile or laptop or internet, etc. So access to classes was difficult for the Adivasi students. This period also saw unprecedented attacks on natural resources of Adivasis. Central government passed several ordinances in this period. For example, policy for commercial mining of coal was implemented without any consultation with states or affected communities. The central government should have 1. Strengthened and expanded public health care. 2. Ensured adequate social security for people. 3. Income and nutrition support for Adivasis. 4th, implemented Forest Rights Act, provision to Panchayat extension to scheduled areas Act, and provision of 5th scheduled areas in letter and spirit. Regarding global call for building back better through diverse stakeholders, civil societies, science, academia, different sections from both government and non-government sectors, such as social workers, human rights defenders, lawyers associations, doctors associations, women and youth groups, amongst others, will have essential roles to play, ranging from resource mobilization, provisions of evidence, solutions and innovations, changes in production patterns and lifestyle, and giving voices to the concerns and needs of underrepresented communities. For instance, since the outbreak of the crisis, the youth and women volunteers from civil societies have swiftly stepped in to provide their support in mitigating the effects of the crisis and promote societal resilience through new initiatives by providing supplies to the needy, particularly elderly, single women who lost their jobs, etc. Connecting and providing basic supports, organizing educational sessions through digital platforms, and disseminating relevant and trustworthy information about the crisis. India should move forward in the process to ratify ILO Convention 169, since ILO's Convention 107 restricts the collective rights of Adivasis, such as self-recognition, self-rule, and governments. Need for government and other stakeholders to promote more eco-friendly environment spaces, cities, villages, communities, as well as environment-friendly product and appliances need to be part of our daily life, which is actually part of Indigenous people's life. Regarding roles to be played by Indigenous peoples and this process of rethinking and building sustainable world post-COVID, is Indigenous peoples present the best model of custodianship and stewardship of environment and natural resources. Indigenous ways of thinking, learning, and decision-making process, that is Indigenous philosophy and governance, can lead to a more sustainable world. These should be protected and promoted. Indigenous peoples with expertise on Indigenous knowledge should be part of policy formation for the recovery from COVID. And regarding support needed from global allies, first is larger collaboration and solidarity of IP organizations is needed, both local to global. And second, rights of Indigenous peoples have to be safeguarded, and strong mechanisms should be placed through international instruments. And third, need to revitalize the Indigenous way of life by promoting traditional Indigenous knowledge system for more sustainable ecosystem. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share my views from India, and wishes for International Day of World Indigenous Peoples. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena. This was such a powerful intervention that really reminded us of the role of women and youth. And what stood out to me was you said Indigenous peoples present the best model of custodianship, and Indigenous peoples' philosophy and governance can lead to a more sustainable world and recovery from COVID. So thank you so much for underlining this. We will now turn to Mr. Keyung, who is a youth activist and Indigenous peoples' human rights defender from Myanmar. Keyung, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning and good afternoon, friends. First of all, I would like to apologize for not being able to turn on the camera for some reasons. But it's really good to be here on the panel, and thank you for the organizers. I would like to talk my 7 minute in 3 parts. One is, a general overview of the situation of COVID and political situations in Myanmar, how it is disproportionately affecting on the Indigenous peoples and also the people in Myanmar. And second part is the role of Indigenous peoples, how we should play in the post-COVID-19, also in the current crisis. And of course, I mean, the last part, I would like to focus on the way forward, how we should be working together. And I hope this discussion will also give us a good strategies and ideas for that as well. So indigenous peoples and also, I mean, the peoples in Myanmar have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, additional to domestic violence, economic hardship, and also military coup, and along with that, shrinking civil space. Because it is also happening because of the lack of fundamental support in terms of access to healthcare, social services, connectivities, access to information, and also the language barriers. As of in the COVID-19 prevention measures, language play a key role. However, in terms, because of the diversities in Myanmar, it had not been reached out in that way. In response, indigenous peoples organizations, human rights defenders, and also civil society organizations have a important role in the front line to work together with the communities, which I strongly acknowledge through this discussion as well. In terms of measures taken in Myanmar, COVID-19 have been utilized in two different ways. One is as a political tools against indigenous peoples and also activists to criminalize and also to undermine the people's movements in Myanmar. And the second tools, government have been utilizing COVID-19 as weaponizing COVID-19. As you can see, the current COVID-19 outbreak in Myanmar have really not been able to control it becoming out of the controls, and the government have been using this as a tool to marginalize indigenous peoples and also the people of Myanmar in terms of social and political aspect of life. Yet in Myanmar, it's also very interesting scenario at the current moments, especially we consider as living in a failed state. On the other hand, state continue to criminalize a health worker for speaking up against military and also holding a strong position of their political belief. On the other hand, military continue to impose strong curfews and armed conflicts that is happening, especially in the border areas of indigenous peoples, have really, bringing a big damage and also impact upon indigenous peoples. For instance, in Nagas, in one of the Naga towns called Namyun, the peoples who have COVID symptoms have been pushed back from the hospital because there is no enough for a test kit, or there is no, a health worker to conduct such things. So such cases have been encouraging to widespread of COVID-19 in the areas. Yet, some of the indigenous strong organizations like non-state actor, Kachin independent organizations, or United War State Army, and also Shan State Army have been taking self-initiative to provide COVID vaccine for their own indigenous communities, which in the last 1 month, they have been able to provide more than 1 million vaccine without any support from the government. It's kind of a self-initiative that they have taken. So these are some kind of a general overview that I want to give you from the perspective of Myanmar. So in along this process, despite of all the challenges that we face on the grounds, we believe that indigenous peoples have to play key roles in the post-COVID-19. And in that, we believe that UN DRIP is one of the key documents which, if we can translate them into actions, which will give a better space for indigenous people to work on the ground effectively, and which will also create a meaningful participation and inclusion of indigenous peoples in decision-making, as well as the right to self-determinations. As we are discussing to engineer a new social contracts to cope COVID-19 impact recovery in the post-COVID-19 situations, I think we must realize that what we have done wrong in the past, and especially marginalizing Indigenous peoples from participation in the policy making and decision making is a key, as well as considering Indigenous people as more, as making them as others, and not being able to bring them in the key platforms are also some of the factors that we have faced in the past, which we do not, which I think that it will be a shame to do that in the post-COVID-19. As looking back to, looking forward to what happens, COVID-19 can be also opportunity, but also there are other key concerning factors that we're worried about. One of the key concern is that the state and the private sectors will exploit natural resources and other resources of Indigenous peoples in attempt to recover, in attempt to economic recovery in the post-COVID-19, which is coming. And of course, some of the things are already happening on the grounds. And I believe that we must have an effective measure to stop such, so that we will not have another kind of a COVID-19 deadly outbreak in the world again. And of course, I think in way forward, it will be important to have a national action plan of UNDRIP in the country level to ensure the participation of Indigenous peoples. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kejung. And I think you really highlighted the proactive organizing of Indigenous peoples to provide vaccines, for example, without getting any support, and the importance of not repeating the mistake of marginalizing Indigenous peoples in decision-making going forward, and really just this sense of agency, including through really translating UNDRIP into action on national level. So thank you so much for that. We now turn to Ms. Masla Rompado. Masla works with Jaringan Orang Asal Sumalasia, or JOAS. She is an executive director of AIPP and a NIWA, Network of Indigenous Women in Asia, steering committee member. We're so happy to have you with us. Masla, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna. I appreciate the kind introduction. Good afternoon from Malaysia. Thank you, AIPP, for the opportunity to speak in this platform. Yesterday, new case of COVID-19 in Malaysia is more than 20,000. COVID-19 has accelerated sharply in these past 2 months. And the global COVID-19 pandemic causing much social and economic upheaval in the lives of many Malaysians, the Orang Asal notwithstanding. After more than 18 months since Malaysia saw its first coronavirus case, the lockdowns have been extended repeatedly. The government erratic policy in dealing with the COVID-19 causing confusion to the people, especially IPs. The IPs are collectively the poorest in the country, largely due to the marginalization from the mainstream society. IPs is not priority in the government plan of combating the pandemic. Even in the lockdown, customary land encroachment activities are still rampant among Orang Asli in Peninsular Malaysia. IPs had demonstrated their resilience in responding to the challenges brought about by the pandemic by practicing traditional knowledge and solutions to survive, including voluntary isolation and sealing of their territories. Due to prolonged lockdown, Indigenous people vulnerability had been further compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic, with the access to healthcare, education, and livelihoods badly affected. Students in rural areas are already 2 years behind in lessons. This is due to the absence of communication tools such as smartphones, laptops, and poor or no internet connectivity to follow online lessons. There are exacerbating poverty, especially IPs who depend on daily work and wages. Indigenous people involved in tourism industry and small traders were severely affected. Public assistance is not sufficient. Most are one of food assistance and do not build up community support systems. If the government continues to provide food and cash aid for the short term, people are going to create dependence. In healthcare issue, people in rural area miss their treatment or lack of medicine supply due to logistic problem. For example, cancer patients have difficulty to attend their doctor appointment because no transport to the hospital. And online registration for vaccine, for poor information to allay fears vaccine. The rural area are not given the right information about the pandemic and also the vaccine. There are logistic issues in carrying out vaccination in remote areas. And food security in many rural communities are still okay and resources are available. Government should provide right and sufficient support for sustainable agriculture as well as for conservation resource management programs for the IPs. In a nutshell, free, prior, and informed consent ethic is a principle that holds that community has the right to give or withhold its consent to proposed projects that may affect the lands they customarily own, occupied, or otherwise use. Malaysia, being a signatory to the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, UNRIP, should uphold the spirit warranted by the declaration. However, they are not properly implemented and are even outright ignored by the government, which gives priority to large-scale resource extraction and the plantation of private companies and state agencies over the rights and interests of the indigenous communities. Most of IPs are surviving on their lands and resources. More reason to grant recognition to lands and resources and stop plundering and destructive developments to ensure indigenous communities can work their lands for their survival during this pandemic. Stop encroachment on traditional forest areas. Indigenous people in Malaysia have fought for recognition from the government to be able to be part of the process in building sustainable world post-COVID. IPs need to be recognized first. Though a signatory to SDG system with barriers bound in Malaysia that inhibit the development of its indigenous people. SDG is designed to be inclusive. It wants to reach the furthest behind first and leave no behind. In addition to a national approach, a localized approach to SDG implementation is a must to attain its lofty ideals. It remains to be argued that a macro Malaysian view on issues on indigenous people is inaccurate and in reality only a micro view of challenges faced by orang asli. It follows that for optimum results, Sabah and Sarawak need to adopt localized approaches in pursuit of the SDG goals. The ambiguous statistic also hid the dismayed truth of the IP's life and needs. Indigenous peoples in Malaysia should have database tracking development of IPs in accordance with the SDG blueprint. This is particularly important with the diversity of indigenous peoples group in Malaysia. Indigenous people in Malaysia, we need strong global cooperation and solidarity, not only to fight COVID-19, but also to fight for our rights. Because of the broad diversity among indigenous peoples, we need funds to update the database tracking development of indigenous people in Malaysia. Funds to disseminate information about pandemics and vaccine to indigenous peoples in rural area also needed. Last but not least, indigenous people in Malaysia also need to be educated for sustainable livelihoods so that they can manage the resources available. That's all from me, Anna. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day in advance to everyone. Back to you, Anna. Thank you
so much. Thank you so much, Masla. And just to point out the points you made about the importance of data and how ambiguous statistics can hide the realities of indigenous peoples and hinder implementation of SDGs, and just highlighting your call for funds to update those databases that track the situation. Thank you so much for that. We now turn to Ms. Rachel S. Mariano. Rachel is an indigenous person from the Cordillera region in the Philippines. She's a staunch woman human rights defender for 2 decades now and a former political detainee. She was the health program desk coordinator of the community health education services and trainings in the Cordillera region when she was charged with multiple trumped up cases of murder and frustrated murder. She's now working with the Cordillera Human Rights Alliance, the human rights arm of Cordillera People's Alliance. She's also the focal person of CPA in its program of enhancing indigenous peoples' human rights defenders network in Asia for the advancement of the rights of indigenous peoples in the Philippines, supported both by the EU and AIPP. Raquel, over to you.
Thank you, Anna.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the privilege of being one of the speakers in this year's celebration of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Indigenous peoples' rights defenders, their organizations, and affected communities are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, mainly because of the government response to the health crisis that excluded non-government organizations and civil society organizations who are critical of how they handle the situation unprofessionally. The government was not ready with the pandemic and missed that opportunity of rallying the people to work together and heal as one nation. In the field of health, the government should have focused on a long-term solution that would empower the capability and capacity of the government healthcare system, but is a militarist approach that is being implemented by retired generals in the whole bureaucracy. Quarantines and lockdown were imposed and restrictions have deprived the people in securing their nutritional needs and requirements for balanced diet. Even in the vaccination program, most of them have to wait since they were categorized as indigent and not as part of the priority list. What the government could have done is to build tertiary hospital facilities for infectious diseases, molecular laboratories and diagnostic centers, employ medical personnel in the different related fields, establish a universal healthcare system for all, the use of the internet platform for information dissemination and not as a source of disinformation, threat, and red tagging. On education, the sudden shift to online or blended learning with poor internet connections in the far-flung areas affected the students who are not used to this system and the unprepared parents directly supervising the students in this new setup. The burden of providing quality education is now upon the shoulders of parents who are also busy working to make both ends meet. On their livelihood, they were not able to transport their farm produce because of the travel restrictions and border protocols. The vegetable products are left in the farm to rot. The underground economy went into a standstill. Suddenly, there were no work and they become unemployed. The most affected are those in the small and medium enterprises and those who do on-call work. On human rights, indigenous activists, critics, political dissent, and advocates are being subjected to legal and judicial attacks by the Duterte government to silence them. In asserting our rights to self-determination, state security forces threaten, harass, intimidate, and neutralize those whom they deem as enemies of the state and even file fabricated cases in court. So this government is hell-bent on arresting indigenous people's rights defenders and attempting to discredit the IPC struggle. We thought that the government's approach to the health crisis is to involve the different sectors, civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, and state agencies in its response to heal as one nation, but had used the anti-insurgency campaign or whole-of-nation approach, sidelining the non-state actors. Even the community pantries were not spared from being accused as a leftist effort or influenced by the communist movement. The bayanihan spirit of helping those who are in need was even demonized by internet trolls supported by government. In the global call for building back better, it seems that the government is relying their whole of nation approach to the health crisis. Under the interagency task force are several task forces responsible to look into the impact of the COVID-19 on health, the economy, employment, and others. We have not seen a comprehensive plan that is based on scientific evidence and from the medical profession in coming up with a multidisciplinary approach to the health crisis. Critics, political dissent, and opposition are not involved. During COVID-19 pandemic, the ideas, concepts, suggestions, and recommendations ran contrary to the government's set of minds and accused them as leftist or communist.
Now is the time for us to consider the IP knowledge and systems of indigenous peoples around the world if we want the next generation to experience the beauty and bounty that nature provides. The capitalist system that is driven by corporate greed and super profit through the exploitation of the world's natural resources is not the road towards sustainable world post-COVID-19. We can learn from the struggles of indigenous peoples for the protection and recognition of their rights as distinct people. The right to self-determination, ancestral lands, and their way of life, the indigenous peoples around the world must assert the right to determine their political system and pursue an economic, social, and cultural systems that embodies the ideals of the world's indigenous peoples. Aside from lobbying work and maximizing the different mechanisms in the United Nations, building solidarity network and advocacy groups are also important at the global scene in promoting the vision of a new social contract that empowers the marginalized sectors, particularly the indigenous peoples, to be partners in decision-making processes. They can expose the evils of these companies in doing businesses in indigenous territories. Investors in these companies should have a say where their investment are being used. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the priorities of big corporations and the government in doing business. They prefer super profit rather than the welfare of the people and the protection of the environment. They violate the rights of people, disregard the free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC processes, and suppress movements protecting ancestral lands and territories. And lastly, we have recommendation to the international community. So we call for the support on our campaign to defend Cordillera PH or Philippines that aims to strengthen local and global solidarity to defend the Cordillera indigenous peoples, lands, and resources from plunder and destruction, and to defend people's rights from state fascism. We call for support from the international community to pursue investigations on the Philippine government on its rights situation arising from the UN Human Rights Council resolution by providing testimonies of victims of human rights violations and documentary evidences of extrajudicial killings by state security forces. A report on the current state of IP in the Philippines was submitted to the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In the Philippines, we are calling for the repeal of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, which is now being deliberated in the Supreme Court. This is the most controversial and unpopular legislation ever passed into law, with 38 petitioners against its passage. And lastly, to request the Commission on Human Rights National Office here in the Philippines to review and issue a formal position paper and legal critique on actions of the National Task Force to End Communist Armed Conflict, declaring different legal organizations as persona non grata or unwanted in different areas and indigenous communities. So that's all for now, and thank you very much for this sharing.
Thank you so much, Raquel, and in particular for emphasizing the role of business and the role of investors as well. And I really agree that investors have such an important role to play in influencing how businesses do their business, and also in making sure they don't invest in unsustainable projects that don't respect FPIC. So thank you so much for that. We now turn to Kriankai Chichuang, who is from the Network of Indigenous Peoples in Thailand. He will speak in Thai, but will have an interpreter. So for those of you that have not used the interpretation button, please make sure to do so now. And we will now turn to Kriankai.
Good afternoon. My name is Kiang Krai, Karen Network for Culture and Environment, Western Thailand. จะขอบคุณล่ามที่จะช่วยสนับสนุนการสื่อสารของผมนะครับผมพยายามจะใช้เวลา ให้คุ้มค่ามากที่สุดในการอธิบายสถานการณ์นักปกป้องสิทธิ์ในประเทศไทยในช่วงเวลาที่ผ่านมาแล้วก็ช่วงนี้นะครับก่อนอื่นก็คือต้องบอกว่าเราเป็นนักปกป้องสิทธิ์นะครับที่ประสานให้กับเครือข่ายพี่น้องชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองทั่วประเทศที่ห่วงใยในพื้นที่สถานการณ์มรดกโลกที่แก่งกระจานนะครับการอธิบายของเราอาจจะเชื่อมโยงสถานการณ์เร่งด่วนเรื่องนี้เป็นหลักด้วยนะครับแล้วอีกส่วนหนึ่งก็คือเราจะอธิบายถึงสถานการณ์โควิดที่กระทบกับพี่น้องชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองในประเทศไทยนะครับเบื้องต้นผมอยากจะอธิบายก่อนว่านักปกป้องสิทธิ์ในพื้นที่กรณีของสถานการณ์แก่งกระจานและพื้นที่อื่นๆที่เกี่ยวข้องกับเรื่องประเด็นทรัพยากรป่าไม้ที่ดินในพื้นที่ดั้งเดิมบรรพบุรุษเนี่ยพบกับสถานการณ์ความรุนแรงเรื่องอะไรนะครับประเด็นที่หนึ่งก็คือกรณีของสถานการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นนักปกป้องสิทธิ์ก็จะถูกคุกคามนะครับที่ผ่านมาถ้ากรณีแก่งกระจานเนี่ยอธิบายได้ว่า7 ปีมาเนี้ยการสูญเสียมีในหลายกรณีมากนอกจากกรณีสำคัญอย่างเช่นบิลลี่อาจารย์ป๊อตนักปกป้องสิทธิ์ที่พยายามช่วยเหลือพี่น้องถูกฆ่าและก็ถูกอุ้มหายนะครับส่วนนักปกป้องสิทธิ์อื่นๆที่เข้าไปสนับสนุนแก้ไขปัญหาก็ถูกข่มขู่คุกคามกรณีตัวอย่างเช่นการแจ้งความดำเนินคดีกับนักปกป้องสิทธิ์ชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองให้มีคดีที่จะต้องเดินทางไปสู้คดีในเมืองในจังหวัดอื่นๆซึ่งไม่ใช่ในพื้นที่ตัวเองก็จะมีความยากลำบากกรณีของอาจารย์วุฒิบุญเลิศตัวอย่างซึ่งเป็นนักวิชาการอิสระและเป็นชาวกะเหรี่ยงที่ไปช่วยเหลือกรณีที่2ทนายความนักสิทธิมนุษยชนที่เป็นกลไกตรงกลางก็ถูกแจ้งความกล่าวหาดำเนินคดีในกรณีของที่บางกลอยด้วยซึ่งอธิบายได้ว่าขนาดคนที่มีศักยภาพคนที่มีชุดความรู้คนที่เป็นนักสิทธิมนุษยชนในตรงกลางยังโดนฟ้องดำเนินคดีได้นั่นหมายความว่านักปกป้องสิทธิที่เป็นชนเผ่าเองซึ่งทั้งศักยภาพทั้งทรัพยากรทั้งความพร้อมเนี่ยเมื่อถูกดำเนินคดีเนี่ยจะหนักหนาสาหัสขนาดไหนอันนี้ยังไม่รวมพี่น้องเองที่เป็นเจ้าของปัญหาในพื้นที่ที่ถูกจับถูกละเมิดสิทธิ์และก็ถูกดำเนินคดีต่างๆนะครับยังไม่จบเท่านั้นนะครับยังมีการส่งสัญญาณการเตือนผ่านบุคคลต่างๆว่าไม่อยากให้นักปกป้องสิทธิ์หรือว่าแกนนำต่างๆเนี่ยที่นำข้อมูลนำสถานการณ์ไปบอกต่อเนี่ยได้ทำหน้าที่ตรงนั้นนะครับกรณีของผมเองเนี่ยอย่างน้อยในช่วงที่ผ่านมาเนี่ยมีเจ้าหน้าที่รัฐนะครับซึ่งมานอกเครื่องแบบมาพบปะมาพูดคุยโดยไม่ได้นัดกันมาก่อนนะครับที่บ้านนะครับหลายๆหน่วยนะครับทั้งโทรศัพท์เข้ามาก็มีนะครับแต่ทุกเรื่องเนี่ยจะถูกโยงไปที่กรณีของแก่งกระจานอันนี้ส่วนตัว1 คนนะครับแต่ยังมีอีกหลายๆคนที่โดนจับตาแล้วก็โดนติดตามกรณีแบบนี้ของผมยังมีเรื่องของการมีรถแปลกๆนะครับมาที่หน้าบ้านแล้วมาจอดสังเกตการอะไรต่างๆเหล่านี้ซึ่งบางครั้งเราก็อยู่บางครั้งเราก็ไม่ได้อยู่ก็จะมีเพื่อนบ้านเนี่ยคอยบอกให้เรานะครับแต่สิ่งที่กังวลก็คือไม่ใช่เป็นรถที่อยู่ในพื้นที่ไม่ใช่เป็นคนในพื้นที่ที่มาอยู่ตรงหน้าบ้านของเราอันนี้คือปรากฏการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นนักปกป้องสิทธิ์มีข้อจำกัดเรื่องของการเข้าถึงจะมีเครือข่ายมาสนับสนุนบ้างแต่เราก็ยังมีข้อจำกัดในความกล้าและก็ความพร้อมที่จะเข้าถึงกระบวนการไปแจ้งความไว้ก่อนเพื่อปกป้องตัวเองนะครับอันนี้ก็คือเป็นข้อจำกัดของนักปกป้องสิทธิ์ที่เป็นชนเผ่านะครับแล้วสถานการณ์ในประเทศไทยเนื่องจากว่าหลังจากเรามีรัฐบาลที่มาจากการรัฐประหารยึดอำนาจบางครั้งเจ้าหน้าที่รัฐก็ใช้จังหวะโอกาสแบบนี้ในการกล่าว โยงว่านักปกป้องสิทธิ์เนี่ยมีเกี่ยวโยงกับเรื่องการเมืองทำให้เราถูกสังคมในบริบทอื่นๆที่เป็นขั้วการเมืองฝ่ายตรงข้ามเนี่ยมองเราในทิศทางไม่ดีว่าไปเกี่ยวโยงกับการเมืองด้วยทำให้เราดำเนินชีวิตค่อนข้างยากลำบากนักปกป้องสิทธิ์อื่นๆดำเนินชีวิตค่อนข้างน่าลำบากนะครับอันนี้คือปรากฏการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นอย่างกรณีนะครับที่สำคัญหลังจากที่มรดกโลกแก่งกระจานได้รับการพิจารณาล่าสุดสัญญาณที่เตือนเราได้ชัดมากและที่เรากังวลมากก็คือตัวรัฐมนตรีเองที่เป็นคนอยู่ในระดับนโยบายเกี่ยวข้องกับกระทรวงทรัพยากรธรรมชาติและสิ่งแวดล้อมมาบอกชี้แจงกับสังคมไทยว่าประเทศไทยไม่มีชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองสิ่งที่เรากังวลหลังจากนี้ก็คือว่าปรากฏการณ์นี้จะทำให้พี่น้องที่ออกมาต่อสู้กลุ่มนักปกป้องสิทธิ์หรือภาคีต่างๆที่จะช่วยพี่น้องในการแก้ไขปัญหาเนี่ยจะถูกสังคมตรงกลางนะครับสังคมในเมืองเนี่ยว่าเราจะไม่มีความชอบธรรมในการต่อสู้หรือเปล่าก็เป็นคำถามแล้วคดีที่มันมีอยู่เนี่ยเรายังมองไม่ออกว่าภาครัฐกลไกรัฐจะแก้ปัญหาให้พี่น้องตรงนั้นอย่างไรอันนี้เป็นเรื่องสำคัญมากในกรณีของแก่งกระจานที่อยากบอกว่านักปกป้องสิทธิ์ลำบากมากอธิบายที่แก่งกระจานกำลังจะบอกว่าในบริบทพื้นที่อื่นๆที่โดนโครงการพัฒนาของรัฐทั้งเหมืองแร่พี่น้องที่อมก๋อยทั้งพื้นที่นโยบายการท่องเที่ยวที่ผ่านมาในพื้นที่กลุ่มชนเผ่าภาคใต้นะครับชาวเลและอื่นๆก็ยังยากลำบากอยู่ในการต่อสู้นะครับแล้วในการถูกกดดันถูกคุกคามในเรื่องคดีความมากมายนะครับส่วนประเด็นของสถานการณ์โควิดที่เกิดขึ้นกับพี่น้องตอนนี้เหมือนความยากลำบากกับพี่น้องชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองในหลายๆประเทศสิ่งที่เรากังวลที่สุดตอนนี้ก็คือเด็กเยาวชนและผู้หญิงที่จะต้องทำงานหนักมากในหลายๆมิติและที่สำคัญในประเทศไทยต้องยอมรับว่าเรายังมีกลุ่มคนไร้รัฐที่ไม่เข้าไม่ถึงการเยียวยาที่เข้าไม่ถึงการดูแลด้านสาธารณสุขขั้นพื้นฐานในการแก้ไขปัญหาในการคลี่คลายเกี่ยวกับสถานการณ์การติดเชื้อการแพร่ระบาดของเชื้อพวกเราพยายามทำเรื่องรณรงค์พวกเราพยายามทำเรื่องปกป้องโดยใช้การภูมิปัญญาเรื่องการปิดหมู่บ้านปิดชุมชนแต่สุดท้ายด้วยระบบของรัฐที่ไม่ชัดเจนแล้วไม่สามารถจัดการได้ในเชิงรูปธรรมการแพร่ระบาดตอนนี้กระจายไปถึงชุมชนชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองพวกเรามีความตระหนกและกังวลในหลายๆพื้นที่นะครับและที่สำคัญเรากำลังเห็นว่าพี่น้องชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองกำลังถูกเลือกปฏิบัติเพราะเราไม่สามารถมีความมั่นใจในการเข้าถึงวัคซีนซึ่งมันควรจะมีความชัดเจนในประเทศไทยแต่ไม่มีอะไรชัดเจนเลยพวกเราเข้าถึงเรื่องของการเยียวยาที่ช้าไม่พอแต่เรื่องวัคซีนเนี่ยเรายังไม่มีความมั่นใจอะไรได้เลยว่าเราจะได้เมื่อไหร่อย่างไรทั้งที่การช่วยเหลือการข้อมูลข่าวสารที่ไปถึงพี่น้องก็ไม่ได้เข้าใจกับสถานการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นเรามีแต่ความหวาดกลัวและกังวลอย่างเดียวที่เจ้าหน้าที่รัฐบอกว่าหลายๆคนมีความเสี่ยงและพวกเราก็ถูกไม่ให้ทำอะไรเลยขณะที่พื้นที่ทางด้านทรัพยากรของพี่น้องเราเนี่ยพวกเราก็เข้าไม่ได้เพราะเจ้าหน้าที่รัฐที่เป็นส่วนของการใช้กฎหมายทรัพยากรกฎหมายป่าไม้กฎหมายที่เกี่ยวข้องกับพื้นที่ของเราพื้นที่ดั้งเดิมของเราเนี่ยก็เข้มข้นก็ยังทำงานเข้มข้นไม่ให้พวกเราไปใช้ทรัพยากรตรงนั้นมาในช่วงเวลาสถานการณ์ตอนนี้ได้อันนี้คือสิ่งที่เราคิดว่ากังวลและเราถูกเลือกปฏิบัติข้อเรียกร้องของเราก็คือเราอยากจะให้รัฐไทยนะครับยอมรับในความมีตัวตนความเป็นชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองความเป็นชนดั้งเดิมของเราในประเทศไทยซึ่งพวกเราขับเคลื่อนมาหลายสิบปีมากนะครับเราอยากให้รัฐไทยเนี่ยยอมรับและช่วยชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองในการผลักดันนโยบายสาธารณะและกฎหมายที่เกี่ยวข้องกับพี่น้องชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองซึ่งตอนนี้เรากำลังช่วยกันอย่างหนักมากที่จะให้เกิดกฎหมายที่เกี่ยวข้องกับ กลุ่มชาติพันธุ์ชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองที่เป็นรูปธรรมด้วยจริงๆนะครับสำคัญที่สุดวันนี้ทุกกระบวนการการพัฒนาเราต้องยอมรับว่าพี่น้องชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองทุกประเทศทั่วโลกและประเทศไทยเองก็แล้วแต่เราเป็นคนที่ร่วมรักษาใช้วิถีจารีตภูมิปัญญาเนี่ยในการรักษาสมดุลรักษาความยั่งยืนให้กับทรัพยากรธรรมชาติป่าไม้สิ่งแวดล้อมต่างๆนั่นเราอยากจะให้รัฐเนี่ยให้เรามีส่วนร่วมในกลไกต่างๆในการพัฒนาในการแก้ไขปัญหาซึ่งที่ผ่านมามันชัดเจนอยู่แล้วว่ารัฐแก้ปัญหาฝ่ายเดียวรัฐจะใช้วิธีสงเคราะห์เยียวยาฝ่ายเดียวเนี่ยมันแก้ได้ไม่หมดแก้ได้ไม่ยั่งยืนพวกเรายังยากลำบากในสถานการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นแต่พวกเราก็ยังยืนยันว่า
I'm so sorry we will have to slowly move on
พวกเราก็ยืนยันว่าพวกเราจะเป็นชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองที่จะรักษาความสมดุลให้กับสังคมให้กับธรรมชาติสิ่งแวดล้อมต่อไปขอบคุณมากครับ
Thank you so much, and I really apologize for having to cut you off. You absolutely play an important role, and we extend our solidarity to you and your people. And I think everyone in this room is objecting to the decision to place KKFC to the World Heritage List. So a lot of solidarity to you. We now move to Mr. Durga Mani Rai, who's a licensed attorney and development professional associated with Indigenous Peoples Human Rights Defenders Folklore Organization in Nepal, named Lawyers Association for Human Rights of Nepalese Indigenous Peoples, or the HERNEP. Durga, you have 7 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you so much, respected participants. First of all, I'd like to wish you all the very best on the occasion of the World Indigenous Day. So, as you all know that we all are going through the extreme situation because of the second wave of coronavirus. And this coronavirus here in Nepal is considered much more devastating than previous one. So various report has suggested that the indigenous peoples and marginalized communities, persons with disabilities are badly affected by coronavirus. So their economic systems, their economic activities are badly impacted by this pandemic. So the indigenous peoples, actually huge number of indigenous persons are engaged in wage labor, and they are migrants worker actually. So we can imagine that the economic situation of indigenous people is actually getting devastated. So they're losing their job. And another issue is that language issues. The indigenous peoples do not have access to information on COVID-19 through their mother traditional language. So participation of indigenous peoples in handling the COVID mechanisms, meaning to say is that participation of indigenous peoples in COVID handling mechanism is denied, and there is not disaggregated data linked to coronavirus. So there is not clear plan and policies on how to deal with the COVID-19. So considering the limited time, I want to talk about the development aggression. The development, when it comes to development aggression, we can talk a lot, but I have to be very much precise and limited because of the time constraint. So one example is that European Investment Bank financed transmission line project is operated in the territories of Gurung indigenous peoples. The indigenous peoples and human rights defenders are protesting the project for the past 5 years, demanding ethic and development justice. The conclusion report of the European Bank's compliance mechanism has clearly suggested that they need to go through the epic process, and they need to fully implement the social and environmental standards of the European Bank. But the Nepal Electricity Authority, which is the state-owned corporations, right? So this corporation is imposing the project activities despite the recommendation of the compliance mechanisms conclusion report. Similarly, mega dam is going to be set to be constructed in the territories of Maji indigenous peoples. Thousands of Maji indigenous peoples are going to be displaced from their traditional land. And it has been learned that the Asian Development Bank is found to be involved in this development projects. Similarly, World Bank Finance Transmission Line project is also implementing in the same line. So these are the major issues that I would like to highlight. So even our indigenous peoples, human rights defenders and the communities are blamed as anti-development activists, right? And even they are threatened to be put in jail in the charge of public offense. So these are the main issues that the indigenous peoples, human rights defenders are facing here in Nepal. So I have very few recommendations very quickly, that indigenous people's participation in decision-making with regard to respond to COVID-19 has to be ensured, and indigenous people's right to land, territories, and resources, including right to self-determination, has to be recognized. Since the government, Nepal is a party to ILO Convention and signatory to UN Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples. Similarly, corporate sectors and banks has to implement human rights due diligence. And not only that, but also the multilateral development banks and development finance institutions, they do have their own operational policies, and that talks about indigenous people's right to FPIC. So at least they need to implement their operational policies while doing their activities in the territories of indigenous peoples. And global alliance, they need to come together to push for the concerned stakeholders to respect our right to self-determinations. And all the indigenous communities should come together to defend our land, territories, and resources. And actually, our indigenous peoples here in Nepal are much divided in line with the political ideologies. They need to come together to defend our lands and to implement our right to self-determination. Thank you very much, Anna. If you have some questions, then I will come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Durga, and I'm sure there will be questions, and thanks for emphasizing the role of development banks. Apologies, just give me 1 second here. I was still listening to Thai. Apologies about that. Thank you so much, Durga. I hope you could hear me. So we now turn to our last speaker, certainly not least, who is a protection coordinator from Frontline Defenders, and for security reasons won't be named. Please, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity, and it was really wonderful to listen to everyone. I think listening to some of the speakers, many of them spoke about the challenges of being Indigenous.
Sorry,
persons.
Sabrina, can you
change
me? To Thai?
Sorry. Is the translation back on? Hello?
I believe it's fine now.
It's fine now? Okay. So thank you again for the opportunity, and just listening to the speakers before me, which is a huge privilege, just recording and listening to what the challenges defenders are facing, and where Indigenous persons face very specific challenges to legitimacy, to credibility, not just vis-a-vis the state, but also within the human rights movement in some cases, especially in our experience. where the disappearing of Indigenous voices is not just with governments, and it's also within mainstream movements. And these voices are considered less credible, less able to frame, and then we frequently find cases where it is being framed, the issues are being framed on behalf of, rather than by Indigenous persons. So with that caveat, and then very conscious that I'm probably doing a little bit of the same, and being really respectful for those around in the room today, I'd like to share a little bit about what Frontline does in about 2 minutes, and then go on to some of the cases of criminalization and targeting that we have witnessed, and where we are trying to do better. And maybe there are lessons there. I think it might be a little ambitious to suggest how we would be recommending collaboration. That's, I think, to come again from the room. But Frontline is an Irish organization. We work globally. I'm based in South Asia, and I cover South Asia for Frontline Defenders. I have colleagues who cover the rest of Asia who are unfortunately not able to make it today. But we support human rights defenders at risk. The thinking behind Frontline, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is that defenders often take up cases and advocacy and advocate on behalf of others. But when they themselves are at risk or under stress, when their physical or mental well-being is threatened, then there's sometimes very little place to turn to. And Frontline is intended as a place which is dedicated for human rights defenders. We support for emergency security through a very small grants program. We also do advocacy and campaigns in cases where it's defender-led and defenders say this is useful. Some of these campaigns can actually happen very quietly. They don't have to have a Frontline tag to it if it's not useful to you. So it's very, very flexible, similar to the security grant support. There's also the digital security and the physical security support and mentoring that happens sometimes most effectively one-on-one rather than in workshop or training settings. To touch a little bit, and there's other work, including risk assessment and protection planning. I'm not going to get into the technical details of how we support, but I will share that in my experience covering South Asia, just moving on to the cases, some of the cases without naming defenders, what we see is that when Indigenous persons are targeted, it is very different. There's a nuance to it, and it's different from when a defender in Delhi or a defender in the capital city of a country is targeted for doing work on behalf of others. It is deeply linked to the community they represent. It is linked to their identity. So it is not just one angle. You would have an Indigenous person who is a woman human rights defender who is arrested from a Women's Day march. And the linkages are so many that it is very difficult for us to fully understand. It could be her business and human rights work, the campaigns against corporate creep, taking over land and spaces from Indigenous communities. It could be her work on illegal detention, arbitrary detention, mass-scale detention of youth from the community, which is again linked to mass criminalization of communities, and then clearing the way, one way or the other, for corporates to come in. And the business and human, it could be the interventions with states, with state governments. It could be on women's rights and the sexual violence committed against women from the community, which again is linked to it's I don't need to educate this audience on that, but for us, the learnings are very quickly from an international perspective is, so why was she arrested? For us, it is all of the above. And then where is the sustaining of this campaign? This is not one individual. Very often when we are connected to the defender directly, when language and access and the ability to frame and family members are involved, the sustaining of the campaign is more consistent. What I have seen is that we need to do more if we're going to collaborate to bridge that gap when it comes to Indigenous persons who are less well connected, where we need to do a lot more work to continue that engagement. Even if a person is arrested, do you then only come back to the case when the person gets COVID or on a bail date or on big day events? Or do you consistently check in with family members and do that work to make sure that they're not isolated in jail and that they don't just become a case? These are things that we are struggling with in terms of ensuring that additional resources and just thinking and time is put into working with Indigenous persons who may not have the same level of support that we think they would, or who are not as familiar. And a speaker before me spoke about specific support to Indigenous persons as part of government packages, donors responding specifically to Indigenous defenders and responding to that. Then Raquel spoke about criminalization. And I think this all ties into how we as INGOs are also responding and not treating it as a business as usual, a case that comes in, we process, we move. Because it's not that for any of the cases, and we can't treat it as equal. In some ways, more effort has to be invested. Where there is global solidarity and there is sustained solidarity, and I think the last part is really important, that this is sustained and not just at the point of arrest or attack or targeting, but it's sustained. We see more impact. We see that it is introduced into different levels of advocacy and intervention with government, but also outside government. And as Frontline, this is something that we are really grappling with. And the one more thing is that when we see early warning signs of trouble to come, we are trying actively to pick up on it. For instance, the privatization of coal in India is something that we anticipated causing trouble for defenders, but we didn't respond to that in the same way. And learning to just listen to what defenders are sharing, and that for Indigenous persons, it's not just an attack from one end, it comes from multiple sides. I want to share a little bit about the business and human rights aspect. I'm conscious of time, but I also want to share a little bit about what we're doing on the business and human rights side at the EU level. We are an EU-based organization. One is the proposed legislation at the European Union on mandatory human rights due diligence. Now, what this means in practice is that it would require companies working in the EU to look at potential human rights risks linked to their work and supply chains and how they're working and how that affects HRDs. This is still very much a work in progress. The next is also the Defenders in Development campaign, which is about pushing the banks to prevent and respond to reprisals. Now, on paper, they say, yes, we're going to do this, but in practice, linking that to an actual response mechanism is so much harder, and we're still doing that work. But more coordination with groups like IPRI and others around the room on how we can do this better and support defenders better is really important. If there's, I think to end with, if there is more that Frontline can support with in this region, please connect with me and my colleague who covers this region, and also with Hannah, that is familiar to some of you. And very happy to connect and answer questions later on in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for explaining how Frontline works and all the different important aspects of work that you do. So with that, we turn to discussion. We have about 15 minutes, and I would like to invite whoever would like to come in to please make your question, maybe specify to which of the presenters you would like for it to be addressed to. Please present yourself, and please kindly keep it short as we want to give many people a chance to speak. Thank you so much. Mathieu, are you trying to come in?
Yes. Welcoming everybody. I am from Assam, at the ancient capital of Assam, Gargaon now. I want to say from Assam Sammilita Mahasangha that for implementation of UNRIP, we request the government of India, but do nothing. And so we have submitted a writ petition 562/2012 in the year 2012 and 2013 and 14, 2 years hearing is going on, and after that 2 judges bench referred our writ petition to 5-member constitution bench. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the open physical hearing of the Supreme Court is stopped. So we are facing a lot of troubles now. So what shall we do in the situation? Number 3, the government of India also voted in favor of the UNRIP with 143 countries of the world in 13 September 2007 at Geneva. But sorry to say that in the Supreme Court, in our writ petition, the government of India said by their affidavit that they have not fully support to the UNRIP. So it is very disgusting. And what shall we do now? For all the guidelines of UNRIP is violated by the government of India. So what shall we do? Number 5, the indigenous people being worst affected by the COVID-19, but the government is failed to consider any specific plans for the indigenous people. So what shall we do now? 6, the medicine and the vaccine for COVID-19 pandemic is not available in the interior village of indigenous people of Assam. So this is the real situation. What shall we do? Number 7, our indigenous women selling different hygienic food products and materials in the markets. But due to COVID-19, the indigenous women heavily affected. So what shall we do? Number 8, the government totally violating the guidelines of UNICEF, ILO, and FAO for the indigenous people during the COVID-19 pandemic situation. So what shall we do in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And maybe I will turn to Elena first, if you have any thoughts, and then to others. I don't expect we'll be able to cover all of those questions, but Elena, if you want to pick anything out and provide your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Rahmanji, for your questions. I think more or less this is the same situation in whole Asia, what you're saying, because UNRIP is in India is it's a moral binding. It's not a legal binding that government, that has, like just kept the face that they are supporting, but with the condition that all Indians are indigenous. So that's a really very like we can't really, we have to really go for, more in a different way. But yeah, of course, this during the pandemic, courts were closed, so that I don't know exactly now how the situation in Northeast, but now it's open. So those things can be continued. Maybe you can try again, but exactly I don't know what the situation, so in each reason that is we have to see. Yeah, but yeah, I don't have much to say in this, but yeah, still it's a serious question for all of us. So we have to really ponder over to this question. Yeah, collectively we have to think what to do.
Thank you, Elena. And yeah, indeed, it's a collective discussion. So does anyone else from the speakers want to come in on any of the questions that Mathieu posed?
ผมครับพี่ครับ
Yes,
เกรียงไกรครับประเทศไทยนะครับสองประเด็นครับผมอยากให้ภาคีต่างประเทศหรือว่าองค์กรที่ช่วยเหลือนักปกป้องสิทธิ์เนี่ยช่วยติดตามแล้วก็ช่วยกดดันกลไกรัฐโดยเฉพาะกระทรวงที่เกี่ยวข้องกับทรัพยากรป่าไม้ในพื้นที่ดั้งเดิมของพี่น้องชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองให้หลังจากประกาศพื้นที่กุมป่าแก่งกระจานเป็นมรดกโลกเนี่ยเราอยากจะให้มีความมั่นใจได้ว่าเขาจะแก้ปัญหาพี่น้องที่ยังค้างคาอยู่เนี่ยให้ได้รับ การแก้ปัญหาให้ครบถ้วนให้พี่น้องสามารถดำเนินชีวิตได้อยู่นะครับเพื่อจะยืนยันได้ว่ามรดกโลกที่ประเทศไทยได้มาเนี่ยมันสง่างามและงดงามกับคนทั่วโลกไม่ใช่เป็นมรดกโลกที่มีคราบน้ำตาหรือมีคราบเลือดของพี่น้องกะเหรี่ยงในพื้นที่ตรงนั้นนะครับส่วนที่สองก็คืออยากจะให้องค์กรหน่วยงานสากลต่างๆหรือเครือข่ายต่างๆทั่วโลกนะครับช่วยสื่อสารและส่งสัญญาณมาที่รัฐประเทศไทยนะครับว่าสิ่งที่พี่น้องเครือข่ายชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองกำลังขับเคลื่อนเรื่องนโยบายหรือกฎหมายที่เกี่ยวข้องกับกลุ่มชาติพันธุ์หรือกลุ่มชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองเนี่ยเป็นความยั่งยืนของรัฐไทยด้วยนะครับและก็ที่สำคัญก็คือวันชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองโลกวันที่9 สิงหาเนี่ยมันสัญญาณนี้คือสัญลักษณ์การขับเคลื่อนกฎหมายเนี่ยคือสัญญาประชาคมใหม่ที่คนไทยพี่น้องเครือข่ายชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองไทยเนี่ยต้องการอยากให้เกิดเป็นของขวัญเป็นความยั่งยืนจริงครับผม
Thank you so much for repeating and reminding us of those crucial demands. Did anyone else want to come in with a question? You can just unmute yourself and come in if you have any questions you'd like to pose. So maybe we'll turn to the question posed in the chat, which is a very good one. And I think everyone in the panel can speak to this. So the question is how to make persons who attack human rights defenders understand the negative consequences of what they do. For example, for their reputation, legal actions, harassment, shaming on social media. And I believe the question is around the reputational damage that, for example, businesses experience when they attack defenders, as well as government bodies, etc. So can I please turn to the panel and have each one of you quickly reflect on this? Maybe Durga, do you want to go first since you went last? Hi, Sari.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Durga.
Yes, sorry, I lost the internet because, can you say that, please? Could you repeat the question again, please?
No problem at all. And I just posted it in the chat to everyone. And we might not get through all the speakers, but if you and others want to reflect on how to make persons who attack human rights defenders understand the negative consequences of what they do. For example, the damage to their reputation, the legal actions that can be taken, the harassment and shaming, and the damage on social media. So how do we tell the story of and make them understand that actually what they're doing is very negative? Do you have any ideas about this?
Yeah, what I'm thinking is that the indigenous peoples or human rights defenders are, they're receiving threat and intimidations while they're defending rights in the ground. So what I would like to suggest here is that they need to be united and actually they need to try to get different options, different strategies and approaches. They need to add up, maybe legal litigations, maybe, that they can do like this. Thank you.
Thanks, Durga. And you're pointing out litigation, and then I see in the chat the comment about impunity. So really this importance of punishing those that negatively affect defenders. Kokon, did you want to come in?
Yes, I want to come in. Actually, I want to go through the first question and the second question. First one I want to respond is about the a lot of questions of Nepal about from Assam, India, and to respond this question, how we are dealing in Bangladesh is that when the government is not responding too many problems, then we are doing that to finding ourselves in the consultating process, both through the government as well as the CSO. There is a platform in Bangladesh called Citizen Platform of Bangladesh, and all the CSOs from the mainstream community as well as indigenous peoples, we are raising our voices there, and they have consulted with the government, as well as government have different slot through the whole society approach, and we are also consulting and raising our demands through that process. And as well as we and consult with the National Human Rights Commission for legally raising our voices. As well as they can go through the global forum that's called the High Level Political Forum, as well as voluntary national reviews. And also they could involve in lobby and advocacy through the donors as well as the diplomatic missions, so that they could pressure the government of India in the UN forum as well as other regional forum. That is that is my response for the Assams. And for the next question, how we are dealing with the case of human rights abuses of human rights defenders in the social media as well as other processes. We are legally going through the legal process like FIR, and we are suggesting through our IPHRDs to the victim that they could file and lodge a complaint to the local police station and go through the court in the legal procedures. And if that not work, we are lodging complaint to the National Human Rights Commission of the Bangladesh, and they have most of the time they have responded us, and they have also pressurized the deputy commissioner of the particular district as well as local police station, so that they could take the complaint and also take intervention, investigating, and then produce report and give it to the National Human Rights Commission. That is one kind of pressure we use and make happen due to this type of problem, as to defend the human rights, indigenous people's human rights defenders. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you, Kokon, for these really practical, useful suggestions. Maybe our speaker from Frontline Defenders would like to very shortly share what's in the chat.
Thank you, Anna. I think that the question on how to respond to perpetrators, where the perpetrator is the state, and very frequently the state is either directly responsible or complicit, either in aiding and abetting or in failing to hold people accountable. Either way, I think state governments are getting away with a lot, especially by putting fear and reprisals in the minds of local and national level actors who voice against these atrocities or violence or threats. And then also the collective silence, the relative silence amongst their global partners. They're very happy for us to go to Geneva, to the Human Rights Council, and say things because that's where we have the space to do so. They're less happy if we go to New York, or if we go to the spaces where powers are, there's no space for indigenous persons or for human rights defenders to access those in the easier ways. So kind of wrapping someone on the back and, slapping them down at the Human Rights Council session is expected, if it happens at all. But it is about accessing those spaces that are denied to us, and especially to indigenous persons, which is the challenge. And any international interventions should listen to and mirror to and complement what is happening on the ground. It cannot transplant action on the ground, which I think sometimes tends to be the case. So those are just kind of 2 cents worth of,
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And we are unfortunately coming close to the end of our session. We will try to answer some of the questions in the chat. Maybe if anyone has quick thoughts on what better mechanisms there are to receive funding from abroad, to given that a lot of funding received from abroad is presented as money laundering. I don't know if anyone has a quick response, and then I'll have to turn it over to our final presenter. Does anyone have thoughts on this? So I'm seeing some comments in the chat in terms of funders and peer donors having to be flexible to help defenders bypass and deal with the situation of funding being presented as money laundering. So perhaps Nicholas, who raised this question, can get in touch with Frontline to get more advice on this. With that, I think we'll unfortunately have to respect everyone's time. We'll have to turn to Mr. Gam Ashimray, Secretary General of Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, who will provide some summary remarks and special remarks at the end. Thank you so much, Gam.
Thank you, Anna, and greetings to all of you. It's been quite touching to listen to all the speakers and the presentations. I really thank them for enriching this conversation and our understanding of the issue. Of course, here I'm to do a summation, so I'll just try to construct the picture of what we have just heard in a way that is possible. It was very rich, so I will not be able to fully do justice to that. But some of the key issues that indicates towards the kind of a larger trend in Asia is perhaps what I will try to do. First thing is that, as we heard, what we have seen is that during this COVID period, and one speaker mentioned that COVID has been weaponized. So how has this been weaponized? As I heard, is one is in the form of enacting detrimental laws and criminalizing indigenous peoples further by using this COVID as a time when people cannot go to the courts or cannot also fully protest, and when people are also aching and fighting and struggling to survive in this very difficult situation. And in that, we have heard this whole narration that how people have tried to survive when it was locked down. They have to walk for hundreds of miles with their wife and children in order to survive, and how people have died and how pregnant women, etc., have also suffered in this very difficult time. So that's one of the kind of challenges that went through, along with these issues of livelihood and access to their own forest and the resources that they have in their own land, territories, and resources. Now, the other very glaring thing that we see, of course, in Asia is this enactment of these very detrimental laws and this criminalization in which a lot of activists, defenders, and even communities in general have been criminalized by red tagging and constructing false charges against them to immobilize them and to pin them down. And in this, we have seen that actually hundreds have been actually killed, and also thousands have been kind of put with false charges. And then along this, we have seen that the courts were closed. People could not access justice. And with this, land grabbing has continued. And then land diversion or land use change have happened in the name of providing solutions, that is for agricultural land and so on. So this kind of false solutions that is actually detrimental to the communities were really pushed by the government. Now, what we also saw from all this is that very clearly there is a breakdown in the system, meaning that educations were denied to many, healthcare systems were broken down, many could not access, for the other kinds of diseases that people were suffering. Livelihood system broke down. So what this means is that there is a lot of failures that we saw in the governance. So that kind of context-specific and responsive institutions and governance systems were not in place. That is what has been exposed during this pandemic. So that means that health system, education system, and other infrastructure, communication systems, that should serve the communities in those people who are in the last mile or in the rural areas. None of these were able to be met by the government. So we very glaringly have seen during this COVID the failure of the governance systems and what is lacking. In spite of this, yes, therefore, indigenous peoples were left to fend themselves. And youth, women, etc. have come forward, whether it's in the aspect of health aid, relief work, or in education work that needs to be done. And this has been done by the communities themselves a lot in response to the situation. But what we're also seeing is that the communities have been left too long because the COVID has been dragged on for a long time. And therefore they're becoming more vulnerable and their defense is losing. That is what has come out. The other aspect is more political in nature, therefore, that what we are seeing is that this whole trend is moving towards more authoritarianism and regression of rights of indigenous peoples. What we have glaringly seen is in Philippines, and now, of course, the recent case in Myanmar, as one of the speakers shared, and that issue of this shrinking of civic space in general, not just for indigenous peoples. So these are the kind of trends that we have seen: detrimental laws and solutions, and shrinking of civic space, and where more and more indigenous peoples are being criminalized, including other communities. So I would like to just end as part of my closing remark is that what we are seeing here then is this issue where the speakers raised that in the post-COVID, in the recovery, we need to look at long-term solutions and long-term vision. And in this, some of the speakers have also articulated the need for recognizing the custodianship and indigenous peoples as agencies who will be providing solutions, the application of indigenous knowledge, our worldviews, and governance systems towards which we must also look towards. And that's how I think this is the part of vision that the participants, the speakers have articulated, fits into the kind of vision of the new social contract that we're looking at as part of the international theme for the World's Indigenous Peoples Day. And along with this, what I would like to just give one point here is that we are seeing a lot of progressive international laws with reference to indigenous peoples and to also with reference to other communities and so on. And some reforms are happening at the UN level. But all these agreements and reforms that is happening are not being translated into real action on the ground by the governments to give meaning to all this. And this is one of the biggest challenge. And therefore, what we are also facing as we look at this call for new social contract, what we must also reflect upon is that we are also in a meaning crisis. We seem like, for example, in this agreement, no matter how much agreement we make, if we do not know the precondition for making meaningful agreements, we are not going to go anywhere. We're going to spiral deeper down into the kind of chaos that we are experiencing. So as we look towards this new social contract, we must also try to uncover and recover this meaning of making meaningful agreements, the principle of making meaningful agreements. That unless we are prepared for that, making agreements is worthless and it has no meaning unless we're able to honor it. And as I wish my Indigenous brothers and sisters and all our allies and supporters meaningful celebration of the world's Indigenous Peoples Day, I would like to end by just quoting back one of the speaker's words, where he said that his courage is the only weapon he has to face at this point of time. I would further elaborate on this to say that I believe that it is our courage that is the most powerful weapon, because guns and bombs maybe can only kill and create a more darker world, but it is this kind of courage of ordinary citizens and communities that awakens the spirit of this journey when we're talking about our vision for a new social contract. So by this courage, I'm sure that more and more people will join us in this journey of awakening. Thank you very much from my side and wish you all the best.